Luke chapter 9 says these words. Jesus said, "Truly I tell you, some of you who are standing here will not taste death before they see the kingdom of God." About 8 days after Jesus said this, he took Peter, John, and James with him and went up on a mountain to pray. As Jesus was praying, the appearance of his face changed, and his clothes became as bright as a flash of lightning. 2 men, Moses and Elijah, appeared in glorious splendor, talking with Jesus. They spoke about Jesus' exodus, which was about to be brought to fulfillment at Jerusalem. Peter and his companions were very sleepy, but when they became fully awake, they saw his glory and the 2 men standing with him. As the men were leaving Jesus, Peter said to him, "Master, it is good for us to be here. Let us put up 3 shelters, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah." Peter did not know what he was saying. While he was speaking, a cloud appeared and covered them, and they were afraid as they entered the cloud. A voice came from the cloud saying, "This is my son, whom I have chosen. Listen to him." When the voice had spoken, they found that Jesus was alone. The disciples kept this to themselves and did not tell anyone at that time what they had seen.
Mountaintops. So we're going to be traversing some landscape. Be prepared. So my name is Matheny, and I'm the Associate Professor of Theology here at MCC. It's a real honor to be here today to share in this series. So Dr. Steve Lord raised the roof for us with Expectant Faith a few weeks ago. I love the story that he shared, one of my favorites, of that hemorrhaging woman who touches the edge of Jesus' cloak and is healed. My takeaway: have the courage to interrupt and expect God to move. And then we had Jam Master Johnson last week encourage us in places of mundane faith, the lower areas, if you will. Such a great message, especially with the story of being aware of the hemorrhoids of pride. You'll have to listen if you missed it. And waffles. Somehow I need waffles at the end of that. So today I'm here to talk about those mountaintop parts of our faith. And I'm going to extend it, like I mentioned, to other liminal spaces. I was actually told I could also talk about valleys, so we're just going to go on in adventure everywhere. And I like to call it the hip-hop mountaintop of faith, okay? One of the things I love about mountaintop experiences, they create excitement, and in that passage that Art read, with the transfiguration moment, Jesus is there the whole time. And it's when the disciples are awake that they notice Jesus. Jesus is there. It's the disciples who all of a sudden take notice. Okay, let's just leave that out there. So mountaintops create excitement and, in that passage, awkwardness. So we're going to talk about awkwardness, because I love awkwardness. Okay, so why do we long for those mountaintop highs in our faith adventure? These hip-hop highs with God? I think there are a couple of reasons. The first, we feel closer to God. The second, there's often been a journey to get there. There's a sense we have arrived. There's a sense that we are experiencing God in a more deeper, intimate way. We feel exposed, we feel seen, and loved all at the same time. Kind of like that Avatar movie where it says, "I see you." It's powerful. So to be fully known, fully seen, and fully loved. Can't get much better than that. this morning, I'm going to take us on a bit of a journey, and the person I'm going to bring on this journey with us is David in the Bible, a person who experienced all of this terrain, the highest highs and the lowest lows. Ancient writers have used the wilderness theme as a way to describe our journeys, this landscape of our lives. So we don't only do mountains, not only mountains take on this rugged significance, but the wilderness does as well, and the desert, and the valley, which I will avoid the valley because I'm like from Napa Valley, and I could like go on, and I don't think that's what the HU I'm talking about. It's like for sure, like radical faith, like, you know, I'll leave the valley, but we'll do wilderness and desert, this probably makes more sense. So I'll leave that to my valley girls later. All right, so I'm gonna start on the mountain, we're gonna head back down into the desert and wilderness, so start of a journey, and then we're gonna go back up again, but on a route that is a little unexpected. So the life of David in the book of Samuel exemplifies some of this hip-hop, don't stop, mountaintop, super low, gotta go slow, oh no, type of spiritual terrain that we all can relate to. Hip-hop, literally. David is on this mountaintop high. This is in 2 Samuel 6. After he's king, he's bringing the ark into Jerusalem. Eugene Peterson writes, but this was no duty. He was worshiping, responding to the living God. He was open to the life of God flowing around and through him. And God, whose ways intersected history in a manner defined by the ark, this presence of God in a sense. It wasn't, but it represented that. Ways of salvation, revelation, and blessing. So worship becomes this strategy, and I love this, where we interrupt our preoccupation with ourselves and attend to the presence of God. So this is what David's doing, and he is dancing. He's dancing so much, he's absolutely lost. He's just like, himself is, in a sense, gone. He's aware of God's presence, just responding to the living God. Awkwardness, yes. His skirt's flying up, things are showing. And his wife, Michal, is like, this is not dignified. It's like, whatever. God is awesome. So, you all can, I'm sure, relate to some of these moments. So he's dancing, David danced, and boy did he dance. These moments are sweet, sometimes fleeting, sometimes awkward. So, David danced. You know, I love this. He was on the edge of mystery. I love this. Of glory, so he danced. Walking is our normal mode of locomotion. But when we're beside ourselves with love, charged with the excess of meaning, shaken out of preoccupation with ourselves, we dance. So being on this hip-hop, mountaintop spirituality is amazing. We're lost in the love of God. The things we long for most and we feel are so close, and God seems so close. So what are other types of landscapes in our journey? Is God farther away in those other places? Mother Teresa, a Roman Catholic nun, founder of the Missionaries of Charity, actually struggled in these difficult landscapes for over 50 years. Her journals reveal a struggle of doubt and just deep, like I don't know what I'm feeling, for like over 50 years. But she continued on being faithful, being a voice for those on the margins, holding lepers as they're dying. Now, all over the world, there's homes, hospices, orphanages established because of what God started through her. If Mother Teresa did not sense God closely in the wilderness terrain of her spiritual journey, was God far away? I cannot speak for Mother Teresa, but in my own journey, I had a wilderness time. And this is when we were in Canada, about to move back to the U.S. It was one of those times where God starts to deconstruct everything you thought you knew. We sold everything, we went to Canada. Now we had our master's degrees, and there was nothing. It's like, wait, isn't this the normal route thought? Get your degree, then get a job, blah, 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 blah. No, wasn't our story in that space. Months and months had gone by, and it was getting really hard to be in this waiting time. I even stopped praying for a while. It gets hard to keep praying for something when nothing's happening for months and months and months. Later, I ended up praying again when I had a nice warning from a 16th century nun who had said praying was like the worst thing you could do in your life. And I'm like, fine, I'll invite God into this pain and into this struggle. But up until then, I was like, it was hard. During this time, this wilderness waiting season, we had a moving truck scheduled to go back to the U.S. And did you know you could rent a moving truck and not know the destination? Well, we found that out. And so we had kids as well. So of course there's that mother bear side of me where I want to protect my children from anything difficult or hard or want. But in that time of wrestling, Jesus asked me one question. And he had to ask it a few times because I did not like this question. Am I enough? Well, yes, Jesus, but I would like this to happen. Am I enough? Well, of course you are, but like we need a job, like I'm doing the basic things. Am I enough? Finally, I got to a place where I said yes. I don't know what this journey will look like. I don't know if there'll be jobs. I don't, but you know what? You are. You're enough. You're enough to carry our family. And boy, it took some time to get there in my wilderness space. So, when you're in this time of waiting in the wilderness, it's a time often writers talk about being refined and preparing us for what's next. Honestly, if we wouldn't have had that really intense waiting time, I would not have been prepared for what was next. But with the ministry that came, we were ready. We knew absolutely this is where we were supposed to be. And now when I look back, I'm like, oh yeah, I needed that space. Jesus had to be enough for what he was preparing us for. So even though he feels farther, God feels farther. Is that true? Another moment for David that I love in the wilderness. This is the next story about David, and this is going to be before he's king, early on. So it's way before he's king. It's a time when he got really, really tired. At this point in the story, he's in the wilderness with his buddies. He's anointed king, but not king yet. So he's in this really long waiting period. So in this wilderness, this deserted space, David's about to do something he could have deeply regretted. Because there is a time, honestly, you get tired. And you're just like, whatever. There's a moment sometimes when you're in a wilderness journey, and some of you have been there, where it's just these little things that tick you off. You're like, that's it. You know, in other moments, you're like, yeah, I can handle it. Yeah, stay faithful, I'm amazing. And then just this dumb little thing, and you're like, that's it. You lose your humanity, and you're like doing crazy things. So David's in this space. He's in the wilderness with his guys. So this is in 1 Samuel 25. David begins to lose a grip on who he was, and it was the last straw and almost sent him in a murderous rage. He forgets who he is and whose he is. So in this moment, he's worn out, been running in the wilderness. So when you're in the wilderness, obviously David's in the wilderness a lot of his life, you can't always be running from Saul. There's moments where you're doing other things. And so one of the other things is he and his guys are protecting those in the area from bandits, protecting sheep, kind of like being watchmen in the area. Eugene Peterson writes, they're the unofficial neighborhood watch group and emergency ambulance service. So they're actually doing good things in the area. Turns out to be sheep shearing time, this time of celebration, where David asked this man he had been protecting, Nabal, for some food from the banquet table. And Nabal's well aware that David had been protecting him and his flocks. Nabal's herdsmen even say, this David, he has been a wall for you. None of our sheep have gone missing. David and his men have been amazing. They had totally protected them. And it was the least Nabal could do, give him some food from the banquet table. Do you know what Nabal does? He not only refuses, he pretends he's never heard of David. This was the last straw. David forgets who he is, and enraged, he's like, get your swords, we're just going to slaughter him. He's like, that's it. He had spent so much time not killing Saul, and then all of a sudden this fool, literally that's his name, Nabal, he's like, that's it, take him out, let's go, boom, let's go. And yeah, of course, the guys are probably like, yes, let's do this. But then, in this wilderness moment, beauty intervenes in this hostile place when David is exhausted and done. There's a Hebrew word, yafeh, which means beautiful. 3 times in Samuel, you see this word, twice referring to David, sometimes translated handsome, and once referring to this woman, Abigail. Okay, Abigail, we do celebrate her like Women's Day. She is like one smart cookie. She hears about her goofy husband. It's like, oh my goodness, seriously, this guy. So she hears what's happening, and she's like, I am going to intervene. Abigail becomes a moment of beauty in one of David's lowest moments. She's like, oh, he's not going to provide stuff. This is not good. So she hears of this. She takes off, runs to Chick-fil-A, loads up on spicy chicken sandwiches, waffle fries, and barbecue sauce. And so she just loads up the donkeys, and she goes to meet David, falls before him, and says, please don't do this thing. Please ignore, she says, this wicked man Nabal. This is her husband. Girls, can you talk about him? Yeah, you can if they're like this. This wicked man Nabal, his name means fool. Please take these gifts from Chick-fil-A. Even though someone is after you, remember who you are. You are God's anointed, but the lives of your enemies will be hurled aside as a stone is thrown from a sling. She reminds him of slings and stones. David probably was jolted a bit, the valley of Elah with Goliath, and said, this is who I am. I'm not going to stoop to this. In this beautiful moment of beauty, Abigail stops him in the wilderness. Eugene Peterson writes, Abigail says in effect, your task, David, is not to exact vengeance. Vengeance is God's business, and you aren't God. You're out here in the wilderness to find out, here it is, what God is doing and who you are before God. The wilderness isn't an experiment station in which you test yourself and find how strong and resilient you are. It's where you discover the strength of God and God's faithful ways of working in and through your life. Nabal is a fool. But you don't have to become a fool. One fool is enough in this story. Love that. So, third slide. Oh, sorry, thank you. Mountain and desert territory connects people symbolically, if not literally, to places of ascent or places of threatening expanse. They remind them of the things they would rather forget, taking them to the edges from which the human psyche normally recoils. Such places have nothing to do with comfort. So David experienced this place of descent during these formation years on a run in the wilderness. This space was a space of like extreme waiting. Anointed but not king, being formed in the harsh realities of life. And during this time, even though David experienced this low, God stopped him with this beautiful space of beauty. The next slide talks about fierce landscapes. They remind us that what we long for and what we fear most are both already within us. Another way of saying is that the desert and mountain terrain provokes the identification and the reordering of boundaries. It confronts people with their edges. Oh, I don't like this, but it's true. But it's amazing. In the desert and mountain wilderness, people discover liminal places suggesting thresholds between where they have been and where they are going. One of the things I also love is I have had one of those moments that I actually wrote it down. This is a book I have absolutely loved, Leap Over a Wall, Eugene Peterson. I wrote it in the book. September 25th, 2011, in the middle of church planting. That waiting time that God prepared us for was church planting. And I said, beauty woke me up one Sunday. I was exhausted. You might be places in your life where you start getting really exhausted, like past the point of exhaustion. And there was a little girl who I was often in the children's ministry. We had quite a few children compared to a small church. And one of them, she had fetal alcohol syndrome as a little one, or in the womb, and so she was one of those you had to watch. If there was any Sharpie, she would find it. And she would color it on the wall. So you're like on, right? You can't just like relax and, oh no, you're on with this little girl. Well, this one morning, I'm sitting at a booth. Our church met in a restaurant, and I have all these little kids around me. And she just wrote on a little piece of paper in the middle of that really tired morning that I had, I love Sam's mom. Oh. And I just kind of started to like tear up, and I said, thank you, Jesus. I needed that today. I love Sam's mom. I love you too, sweetheart. And so I was stopped by beauty in that moment. good reminder. Wrapped up in ourselves, sometimes we forget entirely about God. But then we see ourselves wrapped up in the bundle of God, with navel reduced to nothing more than a footnote in the text of our lives. Yes, that can happen. So one of the things about journeys in the wilderness in the Bible and in our own lives, and I'm going to remind you of this, I'm going to tell you this now, and I'll remind you, you can call me up even in like 10 years, and I'll remind you of this. You can't prepare for wilderness journeys. It's not something that you can train for in a way, but sometimes things just happen and you're in this space. So the next slide talks about, in wilderness extremity, people find themselves running out of language. Ordinary speech seems inappropriate. Mountain and desert people do not talk much. Their words are measured by the leanness of the land. In short, the liminality of desert and mountain terrain redefines every boundary, giving shape to one's life. So these times are going to redefine how you see yourself and God, but you go deeper. And it's a time where things start getting stripped away. One of the things I ran across in this book I was reading, just thinking through different landscapes, it's on this next slide, and it says, and I love this because we often think of that time in the desert with Israel, and it says, biblical religion from ancient Israel to the early church takes shape in a geographical context dominated by desert mountain topography. You are going to be reading that all throughout, right, the biblical story. Yahweh is a God who repeatedly leads the children of Israel into the desert toward a mountain. There was a rabbinic discussion actually on this conjunction, because you know when Israel left Egypt, they didn't take the shortest route. And you're just like, you know, you kind of confused Pharaoh, like, what are they doing wandering through the wilderness? And I love that the rabbis had this discussion on a conjunction, because although God decided against the shorter route because, or for the very reason, that it was easier and less demanding. So God's people are deliberately forced into the desert, taking the harder, more onerous and hazardous route as an exacting exercise in radical faith. So sometimes, maybe it's on purpose we're in these hard places. And I love that Dr. Galort might add, as an exercise in expectant faith. Be ready, right? God's not doing this just to have fun. There is things being formed in this time. You want to go through these terrains. So this place shapes our faith in these extraordinary ways. Peterson continues, what I want to say is this. I readily acknowledge that the circumstantial wilderness is terrible, frightening, and dangerous place. But I also believe it to be a place of beauty. There are things to be seen, heard, experienced in the wilderness, and experienced nowhere else. When we find ourselves in the wilderness, we do well to be frightened. We also do well to be alert, open-eyed. In the wilderness, we're plunged into an awareness of danger and death. At the very same moment, we're plunged, if we let ourselves, into an awareness of the great mystery of God and the extraordinary preciousness of life. I love that. There's beauty in the wilderness. There's beauty on the mountaintop, and again, there's lots of awkwardness on the mountaintop. So this is going to bring us to the last part of what I wanted to share today, this transfiguration passage. I love this. That Art read for us earlier. We have, oh my goodness, this is so great. I connect so deeply. Okay, because I roll premium high octane awkwardness. Like I have sticky out at all times. So I just connect so well with this stuff. And I love that they're on this mountaintop and they're wanting to preserve this moment, right? This artificial moment. I want to keep it here. Let's build a cluster of shrines, right? It's like we're up here, it's like, oh my goodness, there's Moses and Elijah. It's like we just realized that this massive thing is happening, this moment. And Jesus has just been, and they're talking about the Exodus that's about to happen, that Jesus is just about to die on the cross. Can you imagine Moses talking about his Exodus? Well, back when I took him out of Egypt. And Jesus is like, that's helpful, but this is a little different, Moses. And Elijah's like, just zip up, Jesus, skip the whole thing. No, I'm just kidding. Who knows what they were talking about? I always make up a lot of conversations in my head. And I will confess this to you all. I do think Jesus used to fly around when he was alone. When he would go away to pray, I'm like, whatever, you're God. I'm fully convinced he did that. I'll ask him. So build shelters. Okay, sorry. I have a long conversation in my head this morning about it, obviously. So here we're in the scene with Luke. It's a week after Jesus predicts his death. Peter, John, and James are on this mountain praying in the presence of Jesus. Talk about a mountaintop high. You're not only actually physically with Jesus, you're on a mountain, and then there's, boom, other people involved, right? Moses and Elijah, super cool, swapping Exodus stories. The disciples take notice. They're in awe. Peter wants to hold on to this moment. It's good for us to be here. Let us build 3 shelters. One for you, one for Moses, one for Elijah. We'll call it Shrine Land. We'll set up rides and churro booths. That'll be amazing. But then comes the interruption. This would be the best, God. And I have a very Morgan Freeman voice. Movies do this to you, right? This is my son, whom I have chosen. Listen to him. Yeah, Jesus, the one you're with this whole time, focus on that guy, please. It's like, okay. Then they didn't say anything later. Such awkwardness, permanence on there, because they're wanting to create this mountaintop experience to last forever. They're not supposed to. They're amazing. They're not supposed to go on and on. Good. Thank you. Peter's impulse, wanting to preserve this experience artificially in a monument, building a cluster of shrines to commemorate a lost memory. He longs to sustain this display of mind-boggling power that will forever command the respect for others. Ooh, getting to the bottom of it. This is the hardest truth. The vision had no permanence. It cannot be preserved in stone. Those moments can't be contained and bottled up, right? It's a living life with God. It's a life of faith. One thing I learned in all my different experiences, I kept thinking, when do I hit neutral? When am I like in 3rd gear and I can just cruise? And I realized through lots of conversations with amazing people, a life of faith, you have moments of like, where you really sense shalom and peace and there's not a lot of crazy stuff going on, but it's a life of faith. We have those moments, thank you Jesus for those moments, but before you know it, crazy stuff starts happening and you're just in it, right? So I learned through lots of prayer that a life of faith is not a life of neutral. That's been a huge thing for me. But I love that moment. We'll go to the next slide. We have Peter. Sorry. I love this, the song we sang today. Look to the sun. Look to the author and perfecter of your faith. This is where you focus in these journeys. We've all been in these different kinds of landscapes, these liminal spaces. Like I said before, you can't train for this. We learn as we go. You may be surprised in the wilderness, and at times you might feel carried. This is your faith and trust in God, and it's more than you imagined. There may be times you feel like giving up somehow, but then something of beauty might come in your path to remind you who you are and whose you are. So one of these last images that I want to leave you with is that as we're going back up on the mountaintops, I'll read this really quick. Oh, sorry, can you go to the one before that? Thank you. When we are drawn geographically to the remote edges of our world, we are carried metaphorically. This is the image I want to carry you back up into this space. To the edges of ourselves as persons, invited to an emptiness as exhilarating as it is frightening, encountering overwhelming fierceness at the end of all possibilities. At this space, you know yourself to be loved in wild and unanticipated grace. We realize on these mountaintops, in these wilderness, deserts, valleys, back to the mountaintop, that God has been holding us the whole time. The only thing that changes is our perception. God has us and will always has us. One of the images of being on the mountaintop or in the wilderness, this route, to realize God hasn't changed at all. It's just what I have perceived. One of these images that have caught me off guard, you can go to that final slide, is an image from, this in Deuteronomy. Talk about being in the wilderness, being on a mountain. I love this image of just being held. I was translating this with a friend, and it really hit me. Moses says, I try to relieve your fears. Don't be terrified of all this crazy, people. God, your God, is leading the way. He's fighting for you. You saw with your own eyes, you're in a season where they're starting to doubt everything God is doing. Did he lead us here to kill us? You saw with your own eyes what he did for you in Egypt. You saw what he did in the wilderness, how your God carried you. And as I was translating to my friend, as a parent carries their child, so I have carried you. And in that moment, that image just struck me as a parent carries their child. This tender image clings to us in wilderness journeys and mountaintop highs. God carries us tenderly and carefully with great love. No matter how you're feeling, no matter where you're at, hip-hop mountaintop or in a deep desert low, God is the same, right? He loves you as much, whether you feel it or not. Mother Teresa would attest to that as well. So here's a secret again. You can't prepare or train for all these landscapes, but you can trust that God will carry you as a parent carries their child. And this does not mean that it's going to be easy, but it does mean that you're never alone, that God is with you, our Emmanuel. I'd like to close with this prayer. And feel free to look at this image if it's helpful for you. Jesus is the author and finisher of our faith. May this free us today to trust that we do not have to be in control of our stories, and encourage us that we are not alone. May God send you today the peace and grace to know that you are loved, that you are treasured, and that he will carry you through this week to be a source of beauty for others, and keep you in his perfect